this video, we'll be looking at kind of a classic in HO scale. So this here is a Fleischmann Baldwin diesel switcher made in the 1950s and in some of the 60s. This is an all-metal beast of a switcher for HO. Nice and heavy, real good quality, solidly built. And in this video, I'll be giving it a tune-up as well as a review at the end. But before we get started on that, let's go over a little bit of history of the model. Although Fleischmann was founded in 1887 and started making model trains in the 1930s, they didn't start making HO scale models until the early 1950s. In late 1955, they finally released the Baldwin switcher, which we're looking at today, which was based kind of on the VO 660 and VO 1000 switchers, but not really either of the two specifically. Now, as far as I can find, this is available in maybe 4 different color schemes. There might have been more. I can't really say for sure. But the Chicago and Northwestern paint was definitely the most popular, and it was the first ready-to-run model to be painted in the Chicago and Northwestern. Now, when the model was introduced in 1955, it sold for $14.95, which in 2023 dollars is about $170. So not exactly a cheap model, but considering what was available and the amount of quality and metal that you got there, it wasn't really a bad deal either. Fleischmann made a couple more American models, such as the Alco FA2 and then a 282 steam engine. And I don't really know how long they stayed in the US market. I think maybe until the mid-1960s at the latest. And this model, it continued to be sold in Europe until the late 1960s when it was finally discontinued. Now, getting on to the tune-up. I mean, you can see that this is really in very good condition for its age. There's very little wear to the paint, only a couple small scratches and markings here and there that I can see. The rest of the paint is really in excellent condition. Even the decal lettering on there, I'm pretty sure these are water slide decals, are in really good shape. Just a little bit of discoloration that happens with age. Not really much you can do to get around that, besides having them like hermetically sealed for 50 years, which I'm sure pretty much none of these were. But anyway, let's see about getting inside of it. So like the German electric that I worked on from them a while ago, looks like this one has the trucks screwed in place just using these 2 that are on each side of the body. So when you loosen these, it should just allow that truck to drop out from underneath. So this doesn't have an actual chassis. It's just a metal body there with the power truck inside. Wonder what that is. Just a looks like some kind of an electrical coil, maybe for noise reduction, electrical noise reduction. Anyway, get the fuel tank off of there too, so that it doesn't hold the wires down. That is also metal. There goes that one. And then a couple wires inside the body for the headlight. Is that screwed in? Looks like it is. Okay. All right, and then the headlight bulb is just one of these kind of standard for the day, similar to what was used by Athearn and Rivarossi and some others. So let's see how to get that out of there. Okay, yeah, that just pulls out. And yeah, pretty standard light bulb for the day. Just has the surrounding, which grounds it to the chassis or to the body in this case, and then the contact in back, which gets the rest of the power. And then there's the actual power system, or at least as much of a chassis as it has. They just used the same wheels front and back, so they didn't have to come up with additional ones. So there are gears on the front truck even though it's not driven. And then there's also this sprung plunger right here. I'm not quite sure what this is for. Maybe there's some kind of an uncoupling system that they were working in there. Everything seems to be turning nice and smooth though, so I don't think this will take much work to get back up to really good running condition. Let's see. So there are these two screws on the back that are holding this, either they're holding the side frames in place or the coupler, or both, we'll see. Okay, so yeah, that takes off the coupler. Okay, there's actually a screw in the center holding the side frames on. I need to pull out a smaller screwdriver for that. Take that out. There it goes. It's just real tight on there. So it fits around that pin, pushes onto there, and has the screw to hold it on. Then the wheels, it looks like they are actually kind of pressed into place here. Or wait, no. I think I can take this cover off the bottom. On the German electric, the wheels were just pressed through a chassis block. Oh, no, this is built the same way. They're just pressed through there. So, yeah, I don't think there's any need to take those off, but I can at least oil them more easily this way. Gives you some access there. Okay, just a drop of oil on each side of those axles. And one more drop in here. Work that in a little bit. Feels like something's catching. I don't know. Maybe that's something that'll just work itself out. Okay. And as for the motor, just a little oil to this gear. Into the motor's bearings. And how's the motor looking? I'm sure it's fine, but might as well check on it as long as I've got it open. Are these brush caps just pressed on? Yeah. Okay. So a quick pull with some pliers gets the brush caps off of there. And the brushes are actually connected to the springs. So that makes it a lot easier to handle. This piece of cloth tape kind of holding it together. There we go. All right, so there's the inside of it. And yeah, that looks like it's in pretty good condition. I think I can buff that up a little bit though. I'm just going to do it within the motor housing because I don't want to mess up any magnetism. There we go. Giving the commutator a nice mirror finish can help the brushes to slide more smoothly, which can help them to last longer, and it also helps to prevent some buildup around the commutator. All right, so put this back together. And I'll put the bottom of the truck back on there too. Just looking at the power system, it looks like there's only this one wheel that has a wiper on it. Okay. Put the brushes back in. Press those caps back in place. Everything's turning nice and freely. And just looking at the power system, let's see. It looks like this actually picks up from all four wheels in the front truck and then two wheels in the back one. So 6-wheel electrical pickup. That's better than what you get in most models of this age. See how that works. Takes right off. Seems good and strong. Not quite as strong as most of your modern motors. That's still plenty of strength to run this thing along and pull a decent load. I still feel some grip from the tires too, which is pretty good considering their age. Well, in that case, I think I'll just work on cleaning up those wheels and then get this back together. And you know the metal's good quality when it shines up like that. Now, as for the tires, I'll start with the paper towel. Most of the time I avoid using any sort of cleaner or solvent with tires just because I don't want it to soak in and weaken it. Most of the time, paper towel actually does the job. I think there is actually a piece of tire that shouldn't be there though, so there we go. That's interesting. Looks like these tires are actually supposed to have sort of goldish brown color, kind of like the Rivarossi tires used to have. Oh, let's see if I can clean those up just a bit more. And that looks a lot better. I also feel a lot more grip from them now, so it really does help to clean up the tires if you can. Really helps the models to have a lot more traction. So now just one last thing here. It needs some fresh grease. So I'll start by putting just a little bit into these gears. Let that run in slowly. When you're applying grease into a chassis like this, you really want to make sure to do it slowly, because otherwise it can just fling out all over the place and you'll end up having more on yourself than on the model. I think that'll be enough. Okay, I think that's ready to run now. So put these side frames back on. And this is another metal piece here. I thought at first that it was plastic, but this is metal. In fact, just aside from maybe a couple little bushings here and there, there's basically no plastic at all to be found on this. All right. Let's see, I think this just needs a little bit of oil and a wheel cleaning, like the motor truck. And I see a little bit of built up dust in there too. Still not turning super freely in there. Oh, you know what? Those are actually just brass tube bearings inside of there. I thought that was the actual axle. In that case, looks like I'll just have to go at it from the sides. So I should probably check that on the motor truck too. Okay, let's work that in. Oh yeah, that's better. Much better. Now to clean up these wheels, I'll just take the Dremel tool again and buff them real nice and shiny. Just have to be careful not to touch the side frames while I'm at it. As long as I hold things tightly, I don't think that'll be a problem. Okay. I think that looks good and shiny now. Just to wipe off any residue with the paper towel. As shiny as the buffing leaves it, it does always leave sort of dirty residue behind. So you have to get rid of that. Okay, as far as I can tell, those are all ready to run. Oops. That tape's adhesive isn't really holding anymore. If it causes any problems, I'll just replace it with a new one. Now the headlight bulb, check to make sure that's working. Doesn't look like it. Yeah, that bulb's burned out. I don't think I have any more of this size on hand. So for now, well, I'll drop it back in anyway and then maybe find another light bulb some other time. Before I put it back together though, I'm going to take the body up to the sink and give it a quick, gentle cleaning with some soap and water. There, that looks quite a bit better. No more dirt and other dust around there. It's not 100% dry yet, but I think it's enough that I can get this reassembled. The inside looks nice and dry, so no problems there. Now, even though this light bulb doesn't seem to be working, I'm just going to go ahead and put it back in for now. Worry about replacing that later, since it's easy enough to do. Put the power truck in. You have to make sure you have the right screw and washer for these contacts here. Otherwise, you could cause a short circuit, and that would be a problem. There. There's an insulated washer with that screw that keeps it from touching the contact. It's a little tricky to work on here. That's tight in there. Now put the front truck in place. Screw those down. Screw drops in there. Got to line it up with that center hole inside. Okay, that is back together. Now for just a quick track test before I bring it over to the layout. Get it on the rails. And it starts right up. Actually, it looks like the headlight's working too. I wonder why I didn't power up using the terminals alone. Oh well. It's good to know I don't have to replace it. Yeah, that seems like a really good, strong runner. Now the only thing left is the couplers. This one came with a horn hook on it, which is installed in what looks like a Katy spring system. And the other side seems to have that same kind of spring system. I might have the parts to finish these. So I'm going to swap those out with some Katys real quick. Okay, so Katy number 5s were sitting a little too low, so I switched them out, boxes and all, for some new number 37 couplers. And they seem to sit at just the right height for these trucks. So let's see how this works on the layout. All right, got it on the track. Now let's power it up. And there it goes. I'm going pretty quick at full speed. But it does also work well at lower speeds. And reverse is just fine too. There's a tiny bit of squeal from the sprung pickups. But overall, that's turned out to be a really nice runner. Now getting on to the review, I'd say this really is a very nice quality model overall, especially for something that was made in the mid-50s as a ready-to-run product. As you already saw, it is all metal, nice and heavy, just good quality everywhere you look. Getting in close, the paint is nice and bold in its color. The separation between lines isn't exactly the best in quite a few areas, but I'd say they did a pretty good job overall. And the lettering, as I said before, is done with decals, which can yellow with age, so they don't look quite perfect, but still not bad. The Chicago Northwestern logo there looks nice and sharp. You can see there, getting in a bit closer. Let's see how much I can zoom in. Yeah, there you go. So it's nice and clearly printed. And then above that you have the numbers, which are actually cast directly into the body. So no matter what version you get, it's always going to be number 1340. So relettering this requires actually filing off the numbers to change that to whatever you might want, which also means you're going to have to fully repaint it, where on some models that have just separately printed letters, there are various techniques to get those off. And getting around to some of the other details, like the handrails, you can see that they are a solid piece of stamped metal, and the other ones around the front are the same way. Larger handrails and grab irons are separate wire pieces. I'm not quite sure of the material, if this is a plated steel or if this is just a solid aluminum or nickel, but it doesn't seem to have any problems with tarnish or rust, which is nice. And the front of it has that grill cast directly in, which looks all right. It's not exactly the best grill work up close, but from most viewing, it's perfectly acceptable. And now getting along to the top, it's all very simple. The only separate part is the horn, which is installed to the cab. The rest is just simple cast-on detail like those hatches. The headlight, of course the front lens is separately applied since that's a clear plastic piece. As you go around the model, you'll see quite a few screws on the outside, like on the front and rear pilots, as well as the ones that hold the front and rear trucks in place. So that takes away from some of the realism. They do blend in pretty well from a distance though. You don't really notice them most of the time, so I'd say it still looks okay. Not the best, but okay. Now some other details like the smaller grab irons, they are cast onto the body. And since the paint is applied pretty heavy, these smaller and finer details tend to get a little more obscured and filled in. They're not covered and filled in completely, but you can definitely see how much paint is on there. Fuel tank is a simple one-piece design with the air tank around one side and then just a fuel fill around the other. And the truck detail as well. The side frames are one-piece castings, so no separate parts there. Now, like most European-made models, the flanges are quite a bit larger than realistic. They're not the largest you get from some of the other European companies like Rivarossi and Marklin though. So they do go over a code 100 track and maybe even some code 83 track without any trouble. You definitely don't want to put it on anything like code 70. Then one other thing to note is that these walkways in front of the cab, although these are present on the real Baldwin switchers, they are not this high. They made them like this on the model in order to have enough clearance for the motorized truck. So that also takes away from some of the realism of it when you know what the real ones look like. Overall though, this really does capture the look of the Baldwin switchers, and on its own, it is a nice looking model. As for the size of it, it is actually quite a bit out of scale for HO. So this here is a Stewart Baldwin switcher of the same size as the VO 660s and VO 1000s, so you can definitely see the discrepancy there. The Fleischmann model is a few scale feet longer, as well as wider and a little bit taller. So it may be closer to about 1/80th or even 1/78th 00 scale, 00. But like I said, on its own, it's a good looking model and at least fits pretty well on an HO scale railroad. And just to give you a look on the other side, it's pretty much a mirror of the left. So there's not much to say about it that hasn't already been said about the other side of the model. Now, of course, since the couplers are truck mounted, the pilots are open to allow those to swing left and right. So you're not going to get any pilot detail on here unless you remove those couplers from the trucks and build your own new pilots from scratch. And of course, as shown during the whole tune-up, this has one truck powered with a motor built in directly. It's the pancake sidewinder type, 3-pole, but overall a very smooth and efficient running motor. When I checked the stall current of the model, it was just a little bit over an amp, so it's actually a lot more efficient than most of the other models from this time, which had a tendency to draw 2 or even 3 amps when you stalled them. And as I showed before during the tune-up, it is a nice, smooth runner. There's really very little to no wobble at all, so their wheel castings are definitely great quality. Runs nice and smooth. It's pretty quiet. Just some of the typical sort of semi-open frame motor and sidewinder gear noise. Although the gears are pretty quiet for this type of mechanism. And with a 6-wheel pickup, it does make it more reliable over switches than most of the other common models of the time, which had the 4-wheel pickup, 2 wheels on each truck, just one side of each truck. So most of the time, it makes it over switches without any real problem, even at lower speeds. Now going through a switch, I'll just activate these here real quick. It can lose some power over more complicated spots. So it does have to be run through with a little extra speed, because if you try and go too slowly with it, it might make it, or it might not. Right there it stalled because there are no more wheels on powered rails. But moving that along just a little bit, picks right back up. And it goes right along any sort of track without derailing, so it's definitely a good tracking model. And the traction tires, they give it plenty of pulling power along with the metal body. And that motor is pretty powerful for the gearing too. Has no problem slipping the wheels when you add a little extra voltage. There we go. Yeah, that's just a 7.5 volts right there. It can slip the wheels. Now, out of the box, this comes with hook and loop type couplers instead of horn hooks or KDs, so if you want this to couple to any of your American-made models from anyone else, except maybe some of the early stuff from Mantua, you have to change out those couplers, like I did with KD number 37s. I think there was a little debris on the track that hit something up, so that's where that little bit of thumping noise came from. Now getting up to full speed. Already did some speed checking on here, and running at 12 volts, the there. Keep the camera on too. So there's the maximum speed at 12 volts, which I measure to be 170 scale miles per hour, which is almost 3 times the 65 miles per hour of the real Baldwin switchers, at least the VO 1000. And at the low speed, because of the gearing, it doesn't have the best low speed control, although it does take off nice and smoothly. But running steadily, the best I've been able to do is about 10 scale miles per hour, or about here. To get any good low speed operation, you have to use a pulse power setting if your controller has that available. With pulse power, of course there's going to be some noise, but you can get some much better switching operation. Now taking a look at the pulling power, I have loaded this up with a total of 33 free-rolling freight cars that extend all the way around the track, and the only reason I didn't add more is because I ran out of room. And even with all those freight cars, it takes right off. And even with that load, that's only pulling about 1/4 of an amp to 0.3 amps on average. So yeah, it's definitely got traction to spare, and the motor is more than powerful enough to pull anything you put behind it. So all in all, for the running quality, this really is a nice smooth runner. I have noticed just a very light surging motion, but most of the time that's not really too noticeable. It's smooth overall, powerful, efficient, and it can pull a realistic load at a realistic speed. You just want to keep the voltage down a little bit so it doesn't start flying around like a high-speed passenger train. So to sum up for this model, this is a nice representation of Baldwin's VO 660 and 1000 switchers, even if it is out of scale and too large, as long as you don't put it next to a more realistically scaled model. It looks perfectly fine on an HO railroad. The body casting is good, the detail is decent for its day, and the paint doesn't look too bad either. Now as a running model, I would rate this as being overall very good. It's smooth, powerful, efficient, reliable, and the fact that it's very easy to take it apart means that it's simple to work on it and keep it tuned up and running well, which is a definite plus. And as for DCC installation, it will of course take some work being an older motor, so you have to isolate the brushes, but once that's done, there's plenty of room inside to fit a decoder as well as 1 or maybe even 2 speakers if you can find the space for them. And of course, with the metal body and traction tires, this has more than enough power and traction to pull the most unrealistic loads up even an unrealistic grade for any switcher engine like this. So you've got plenty of power to spare wherever you need it. Now for those of you who are interested in finding one of these, they can typically be found in decent condition in the $40 to $60, maybe $70 range. And considering the build quality and the features you get, I'd say that's a really good value. So if you don't mind the oversized scaling of it, I'd say that if you find one of these, definitely get it because you're not going to be disappointed.